Hey, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Conscious Style podcast. Today, I am joined by Nicole Bassett, who is the co founder of the Renewal Workshop, an exciting circular business that is leading the apparel and textile industry towards circular business models, restoring value, and reducing waste. Nicole, thank you so much for coming on the Conscious Style podcast. I'm really excited for this conversation. Could you start us off with a brief background of yourself, why you founded the Renewal Workshop, and how you ended up where you are today with your company?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. So my background, I got into the apparel industry via environmental studies. So I did a master's degree in environmental studies and business, and out of school, I got an internship at Patagonia. And I wasn't necessarily interested in the apparel industry or really understood the apparel industry, but I was very much interested in environmentalism and how businesses could be agents of change. This was back in the early 2000s. So it would be weird for people to think about, but there was a time when businesses weren't as engaged from a proactive perspective. So my job at Patagonia early was in the human rights side of the business. So I worked in the supply chain, and we looked at the factories that we were in, and then went down all the way to the cotton fields we were in, and looking at how human and environmental rights were being addressed in the supply chain, and trying to find factories that aligned with our values as a company. And then I went on to work for Prana, which is another apparel brand in the outdoor space, now owned by Columbia Sportswear. And back then, it was early days inside of the sustainability strategy within the company. And it was an interesting story because Prana, as you can imagine, for those yogis who are listening, means the life force. So all the customers of Prana just assumed everything we were doing was completely environmentally and socially conscious. And that wasn't necessarily true at that time. The company had done a little bit of organic cotton, but that was about it. And so I was brought in to really create a whole strategy and move the company towards a lot more sustainable practices. So we did great work, and again, looked at human rights in the supply chain, and was one of the first companies to bring fair trade apparel to the US. So the fair trade standard inside of the apparel industry. And then we looked a lot at materials and how to increase the amount of organic and recycled materials, and also the chemistry of the products, our packaging, our operations, like all of it. And interestingly, I did all of that work for about 12, 13 years. And at the end of the day, kind of came to a realization like we were doing really good work, but we were still making more stuff. And the reason we had to make more stuff is the business had its structure was based around a business model that was the more stuff you make or the higher price point you make is how we generate revenue. Mm-hmm. And that really got me thinking about, okay, well, how are we going to change the industry if we're all relying on a business model that's about growth? And the circular economy is obviously not something new. It's been around, the concept, for a long time. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation has been talking about it again since the early 2000s. And so at that time, I took sort of a step back and started to really think about, like, what would it look like for the apparel industry to have a circular business model where truly the product is designed and there is a post-consumer supply chain for it to the product to have its life extended and to be able to capture for recycling. And that really became the sort of light bulb moment of like, okay, that doesn't exist today. It's going to have to get built. And so let's build it. And that's kind of how we got started.
Yeah, really cool. So you've been in the sustainable apparel space for quite some time. And I do want to get into the nitty-gritty of what the Renewal Workshop does today. But first, I wanted to step back a little and talk about the key word of this season of the podcast, which is circularity. And so, as someone who works directly inside of the circular fashion economy, a co founder of a circular business, could you share your perspective of what circularity is, especially how it relates to fashion?
Absolutely. Yeah. So for me, circularity is about designing products and systems, thinking about where things came from and where they're going to go next. So in fashion, it's really about the supply chain. So that created the products. Like, are we doing right by the people and the planet? And then once that product is done its first use, is there actually a system for maintaining the value of that product? So it gets more uses, and ultimately, when it's no longer useful in the state in which it was designed for, there's like a system in place to collect the value of that and move it into a next state. So you could see products being designed for reuse and then recyclability, and then brands setting up systems in place that could allow a product to easily move through these different phases of its life cycle. That's how I would say it.
Okay, yeah, that's great. That's really useful. I think that we hear that word a lot and it's confusing what it means, but it's really about, yeah, the whole system, not only what it's made from or not only where it's going, but kind of the whole
The whole thing.
picture. So
Mhm.
thank you for that and breaking that down. And now I'd love to dive more into how the Renewal Workshop supports a circular fashion economy. So could you walk us through the process of how the Renewal Workshop partners with brands to make their models more circular and maybe other, initiatives that you're involved with?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Renewal Workshop's primary customer are brands. So we work with brands and basically provide all of the operations and services needed to take their product post consumer to the next phases of its life cycle. So I'll use the North Face as an example. They're one of our customers. So now the North Face, all their products that um, get returned to them either through their stores or wholesale accounts or e-com business that was otherwise like damaged. So you can imagine a zipper gets broken and it gets returned to them. Um, and or someone tries on something at a store and there's makeup stains on a product, and so or someone takes it home and washes it and returns it. So there's a lot of reasons why product comes back that a brand can't resell as new. And this is across all brands have this experience. Also, brands get products back that are from their customers directly. So the North Face has a trade-in program for their VIP customers, and then but other brands have take back programs as well. All of that product before was sort of at the end of its first life. Brands had the option of donating it. A lot of donations went overseas. A lot of products get landfilled or incinerated. There just weren't a lot of options for what happens to this product, but it's perfectly good, great, functional
Right.
clothing. So that product comes to our facilities where we then sort it for its quality standards. We have the ability and we can extract more product, about 40% more product out of sort of this pile because we have operations in house with cleaning and with repairs. We have different quality standards. So there's like a like new or a very good or a good option for consumers to buy the product. And we do photography on that product. And then we actually have the technology that allows us to resell the product again. So there's some stuff where, we can talk about this a little later, but like product today isn't designed for getting resold again.
Hmm.
So we have to do a bunch of work behind the scenes, and we have a tech platform that does that to get access to that data. So it allows it to get resent again, resold again. And then we have a re-commerce platform that brands use to actually do the resale. So you can go to the North Face Renewed, and the entire site is filled with renewed product. So as far as the business model for the brand goes, they are now taking a waste, so a cost to their business, and they pay us to renew the product, and then they get to resell it again. So they're actually able to generate sales off something that was already made and didn't have value before. So that's how and so our operations really are about getting the brand in a place where they can see a viability of having another way of generating revenue off what they've made before.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it really just makes so much sense in so many levels, reducing waste, minimizing costs, maybe even like adding a revenue stream. So you mentioned the North Face, and I actually didn't realize that North Face Renewed was your technology, or the Renewal Workshop was involved with that. So that's really, really cool. I love to see more and more brands do that. And I think it's so obviously important for the future of sustainable fashion, circular fashion, all of that. So, and these brands have such a big customer base, so they can really reach so many more people who maybe wouldn't otherwise be, introduced to circular fashion or secondhand fashion, or, have misconceptions about secondhand fashion or things like that. And so you do work with quite a few larger brands, and I would imagine that would be, kind of complicated, that these brands have large, complex supply chains. And so I'm curious what some of the challenges have been that you've run into, and then how you worked around it, how you found solutions, or maybe if there aren't solutions yet, what do we need to get there?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Because really what's happening right now is we have a linear economy where, like, if you think about it, everything was designed for making and selling something. Like, no one wants the stuff back. Having it back is like a big cost to the business.
Yeah.
So the accounting, the product design, everything is very set in its ways, and it's been like that for a long time. So we're trying to change a very entrenched model. So you can imagine what that's like. So there's definitely a lot of challenges. So I'll give you an example. So products were definitely not designed to be resold again. So we have to do some fancy things to get access to information that when you were first designing a product and you didn't think about reselling again, you never would have considered this. So, for example, if I'm wearing, let's call this the Nicole tank top, and it originally retailed for $50. When this tank top comes into our building, all we know about it is it's black, because I can see that. It's a tank top because I can see that. And hopefully, fingers crossed, it has the size tag still on it and the content tag still on it, right? So I don't know what this was called. I didn't know this was called the Nicole tank top, and I didn't know it resold for $50. So we have to use some kind of ID on the product to be able to match back to the original product data so that it could get sold
Right.
again. So that's an example of where, like, oh, if I needed to sell this again, how do I design it the first time to make it more efficient so it could go and get sold again?
Mm-hmm.
Another challenge that we've run into, which I think is really interesting, is brands will design products for a specific trend, or they may be designing products for like an outlet store or a wholesale account, like that they actually don't ever want to sell again. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so then that has to get factored in as well. It's like, okay, I'm making this product today and it could come back into my life in 3 years from now. Do I want it back into my life again? Or was I just trying to like make a quick buck early in the business cycle, and now I'm going to have this burden later on? So thinking about that. The other thing is around accounting. So accounting systems are set up and inventory management systems are set up. So
Right.
you make a product, you get a margin, and then like, oh wait, I want to resell this again. So my inventory management system was not designed to have a new version and a renewed version inside of the same system. So a lot of those challenges are like there's a lot of solutions that can happen in as brands start to embody like a circularity strategy, and they start to look at design through that lens and say, okay, I am going to see this product again in the future. And then they're starting to design differently, and starting to think through how to do the accounting differently and things like that. But as far as like having solutions on the table, we've been able to work with our brand partners and get access to the original product data. We use our technology and our platform to be able to move that data through the system so it can get back out, for the consumer, so they can have a really high level experience when they're shopping. And so all of these things are more like little puzzles that we're constantly solving.
Yeah.
But we also get really excited about this vision of like, oh, if we design the whole system in the way we see it, we're going to be able to unlock a lot of opportunity. Because right now we're dealing with a lot of things that are a bit manual and sort of a little bit backwards, because the system we're in is linear still, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why, like, yeah, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation talks about how it starts at the design stage. So, like, designing out waste, designing with circularity in mind from the beginning. And also, it's something that is taught a lot in, like, the Slow Factory courses. Like, Celine of Slow Factory will talk a lot about that and, like, designing out waste or waste-led design, like really thinking about how to utilize, not only utilize waste, but think about the end of life of that product. And yeah, making sure that, for instance, the details are being tracked of that garment and maybe embedded somehow in that garment so it can be more easily resold, or, you know, making it easier to repair that garment with various things, maybe standardizing all the buttons for your collections or something like that. Or yeah, that's lots to think about. So yeah, really getting the wheels turning with that. So that's very fascinating. But speaking of challenges, something that a previous guest on the show brought up, Emily Stokel, in episode 10, she was saying how while brands are launching resale programs and, you know, talking about secondhand economy, we're still not really seeing a decline in new production overall, right? The total number of garments being produced is still going up. Maybe not, you know, last year with COVID, but overall it is still increasing. So could you talk to that a little bit? Like, why aren't brands talking about making less stuff? Do you hear brands talking about reducing production, you know, behind the scenes? And if not, what do you think we need to get that conversation going?
It's a great
Lots
question.
there.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm glad you're asking it. And I think it's the right one to keep asking. So I would say we are at the beginning of something. So I think there's a little bit, of, for those of us who have been in it for a long time, are like, oh, it's really obvious and clear. And for others, it's like, oh, I need more data or I need more time to figure it out. So I want to answer your question in sort of a roundabout way. And when we started the company, we actually were like, okay, in like, does renewed actually have a lower impact? And so intuitively, people are like running around saying, of course, like, you wear something again instead of making something new, that has to be, a lower impact. But when we started looking around, we actually didn't have any data to prove that. So we are going to launch a report this fall, our second leading circular report, that's going to demonstrate the data that we've been able to show, where actually, yes, renewing something has a lower carbon impact than making something new. So now that we have this data, what we can say to a brand is like, okay, if you want to reduce your carbon impact, you can do so by creating new revenue out of items you already have. So they really could make less stuff and still grow their businesses. But where we are today, I would say, is most brands are looking at re-commerce as like additive revenue. And there isn't strategy around, oh yeah, I can see how, or I feel the confidence of being able to like say we're okay to make less stuff. Because I mean, a lot of brands are public companies and they're required to show quarterly earnings, and what is their profitability like, and what is their growth like. And so there's this, there's like, if that's the only measurement stick, we're never going to see a decrease of product. We're only going to see like, hey, wow, we unlocked a whole bunch of extra revenue. But it's when we
Yeah.
line up the carbon and the revenue together, you have to create boundaries on either side. And so the tension has to be strong enough to show, okay, I am increasing my revenue, but I'm also increasing my carbon. Or if I make these strategic business changes, like making less new and putting more emphasis on other business models inside the company, re-commerce being one of them, then we can actually start with data to show, okay, this is where we can start to make some chips away at our carbon impact. So it's probably the most important question, and more companies, hopefully over the next few years, are going to start to like have strategy around it. But right now, everyone's just sort of like, oh, this is a nice little win.
Right. Yeah, I was kind of like afraid of that. Do you think that is there legislation in the works? Because I know like France is either has or is introducing end of life legislation. And I know that like Germany and other countries are starting to take more action on human rights diligence. But I haven't really seen anything in terms of production or anything like that. But I was curious if you've heard of anything like that happening or.
There won't be any. I haven't, and there won't be anything around like legislating less production. What will end
Right.
up happening is either these public statements around carbon reduction are going to be held more accountable, either by the
Hmm.
investor community or by government, and brands, when they start to disclose their carbon impact and they're not showing demonstrative improvements on reducing, that's then potentially where legislation could get involved, and like there could be fines or there could be cap and trade. Like there's a lot of things that could be happening, or incentives could be in place around businesses who reduce their carbon by a certain amount. The other legislation that is uh, it doesn't get at production, but is something that always gets talked about, is extended producer responsibility, which is when brands
Right.
take responsibility for what they make. And we've had a little bit of wins in the States recently in the packaging space. So Maine passed a bill, Oregon just actually passed a recycling modernization bill, but within that bill, the money from the producers of packaging have to invest into recycling systems. So it's sort of
Hmm.
like a step towards some more stringent ERP or EP, extended producer EPR. Uh, but the US is behind, like really behind. Like Canada has
Yeah.
stuff, Europe has stuff. And so hopefully brands who sell into those markets are going to start to think through like, oh, okay, what do I do as a business as a whole?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And do you think that, like, I guess consumers holding brands accountable would help? Like, I mean, we don't really see that many people talking about it, but I feel like those conversations are definitely bubbling, like that. Or do you think just like consumers just should buy less and then eventually happen? Because with that, my concern is that brands already waste so much, like waste their inventory. And so I don't know if necessarily demanding less is the entire answer to reducing, overproduction, but maybe it could help, I guess.
That's something interesting to talk about, because it is true, right? Like if you have, it's almost like competing or like parallel existences. You've got a brand who needs to generate revenues, and the only way they know how is to make more stuff. So that's occurring over
Yeah.
here, regardless of whether or not there's a consumer that wants their more stuff. And it could be the consumer relationship with the brand is so complex. It may be like a personal decision of like, I'm not going to buy anything, period, as a consumer. And does a brand actually like, is it like, oh, but what if I designed it cooler, or if I did things in a different way, would you be able to get that customer back, or is that customer gone forever? And I think there's like a gap of time of like learning the customer behavior and then how the business transitions. So I would say for anyone who's interested in wanting to see the businesses actually change is to find the brands who are being very strategic around circular and not one-off projects that just sort of like, oh, I upcycled some stuff once. Like, it's truly like I am committed to offering a renewed line into my business model. I'm committed to taking back what we make. I'm committed to circular product design. And like, not only like it has to be part of like their strategy, but it also has to be demonstrated in our actions, and then be like, okay, I'm going to be a consumer within that, and I'm going to support you in that, because if a brand will not be able to do it if there's no consumer that wants it to happen. And so as much as people can support the change that they want to see, like, that is really where it happens.
Like supporting that renewed, like instead of buying new, buying something that was renewed or repurposed or whatever. Yeah, for sure.
And from the
So,
brand, I would say, so there's something like, yeah, I can go down the street to Goodwill and buy a pair of jeans, and that's fantastic because I've gotten those jeans reused again, and it didn't have to go into landfill or whatever. But the brand didn't get any like revenue from that. It didn't change the brand's business model. It operated over here outside of that system. So as much as I can come, and that's where customers do have a great voice to go to all your favorite brands and be like, I don't want to buy your stuff new. I want to buy it renewed.
right.
How can I do this? How can you give me that option?
Right, like maybe sending emails or messages being like, I love the style of your clothes, but I want to shop only secondhand or mostly secondhand. Would you consider doing that? Like Levi's launched a resale program, which was, exciting, but kind of late to the game when you consider how like Levi's like was so popular secondhand on Depop and just everywhere. Like everybody wanted vintage Levi's, and that was such a hot item in the secondhand market. It took them like I feel like so long, but I'm glad to see they're finally getting involved. But yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, good points to talk about. And so these conversations about reduction and production are not just important, of course, from a waste perspective, but also from a climate lens. And the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, recently released their sixth climate change assessment report, and it was their most alarming yet, declaring that climate change is, quote, widespread, rapid, and intensifying. And so there wasn't necessarily anything new if we're reading, climate news on a regular basis, but the report is still an extremely urgent call to action. And we really need every industry to do their part, including the fashion industry, of course. So, from your vantage point, what sort of large scale business model shifts do fashion companies and maybe companies in general need to implement?
Yes. Well, what's very exciting is that even in the time frame of the Renewal Workshop, when we first started 5 years ago, it was a lot about waste, and now it really is shifting to a decarbonization strategy and how do we address carbon. So even the awareness and the fact that the language has changed is really important, and I think gives me a lot of hope that people know the urgency. So as far as like shifts that businesses can do, I've been doing sustainability for a long time. And we started back in the day with what we can control. And really, it comes down to the products that we make. So if you're an apparel brand, you make apparel. If you're a textile brand or home goods brand, you make home goods. And when we started to assess the impact of what it was, the moment or the key thing was to figure out what are our leverage points for changing that impact. So what harm are we causing and how can we fix it? And so that's why you're going to see a lot of emphasis on materials, and why brands are really looking at the environmental impact of our product in the materials piece, because materials make up a majority of our product's impact. And so what I find sort of heartbreaking in a little bit is that work was done decades ago. And the industry still, there are a lot of brands that don't, even though we have the solution and we can say this material is more environmentally friendly, this material has a lower carbon impact, all of these things. A lot of brands have not adopted a material strategy, and they're still making product as, with the conventional materials that a lot of people know just cause harm. Um, so, so you've got like some brands that are further along the process who are moving into other issues, which are these things like the energy use of our supply chain or the business model in which is built on. And so basically what I really see is that we need to have a faster adoption into these solutions that we know exist already. So if we're trying to reduce our carbon, we just have to use less carbon. So it's like, right? So that can come from decarbonizing the energy of the industry. So really looking at the supply chain and saying, like, I remember going to factories in India and I literally saw them shoveling coal into a burner to heat water, to run the boiler, to dye fabric. And so how do factories like that get solar? How do they get wind? Other options that are out there. And so that's a big piece. And then the other is like, how do we make, how do we use how do we make our revenue without using as much stuff, right? So I would say it's a little heartbreaking because I've been in it for 20 years and I've only seen so much change, and I know what we need to be doing. And we're just not moving fast enough as an industry. And it's not going to change until we see more push. Like the pressure has to get more intense and it really will come from government and consumers, and government will move things faster than consumers will. But right now my experience has been, we've had a lot of solutions at the table, and brands are like, oh yeah, we'll get to that in 2023. We'll get to that in like this time in the future. And I think that the most recent IPCC report showed us is like, we like literally don't have more time. Like
Right.
we cannot wait 10 years or 5 years to start this stuff. We have to start in the next 2 years because it's like cumulative problems, right? Like we're going to have, I've read the report, and it's actually like, the summary report is really easy to read in the sense like, you can get into the weeds really quickly, but there's a lot of great visuals, and the modeling allows you to like, oh, that's what a 1% change could do, or 1 degree temperature change could do. And that's what 3 and a 4. And when you look at the 4-degree temperature change, you're like, whoa, okay. I got some motivation in me to do something now.
Right. Right. They need to be like looking that before every meeting that the executives have, like, reminder, to do something about this. Yeah, that's interesting. Lots that these changes have been around for so long. Like I think as an individual, you don't necessarily know that when the better solutions were available to these brands, because they're not necessarily taking action on it always. So it's very interesting. So you touched on this a little bit, but what do you think needs to happen for the fashion industry to shift from being more linear to circular, like investments, government action, citizen involvement? It feels overwhelming. But what are some of the solutions maybe in the works? Obviously, the Renewal Workshop is being part of the change. So what other like solutions are you seeing on the horizon?
Yeah, so I will definitely plug us a little bit here because that's why we started the company, is to be a solution for these brands. Because shifting your entire business model from linear to circle is like, it's not easy. And if you can have someone that can sort of hold your hand through that process, then you're going to get there faster without as much disruption. And especially today, like us 5 years ago versus where we are now and what we know. So re-commerce is available today. Like brands could roll it out tomorrow and get that business model going. And maybe today it is an additive revenue, but over time, as the brands get more sophisticated in how they're planning their revenue and their strategy, then if they're locked in and have a really solid re-commerce business model, then they'll feel the more freedom to be able to make other changes. The other thing that brands can do is go through a circular design workshop. So we run that for brands and basically help designers think through not only designing product for circular, but designing for circular business models. And we've run a number of brands through who have adopted change immediately. Like the next day, they went into their line reviews and they were like, okay, now I know, because I didn't know before. Like a lot of it is just brand new way of seeing the world. And I love that. I love sitting there listening to a designer go, okay, so what you're saying is that I've been building garbage for the last 10 years of my career. And we're like, a little bit. They're like, okay, but now I know. And I know the places where I make decisions that can change that. And then there's so those are things like tomorrow, get that going inside the business. And then longer term, brands can start to change their products and their internal software and their like business models and sort of financial models, and that stuff comes over time. And what we see is that there is all, change management happens in the same way, right? Like there's like resistance, and then there's sort of like a bit of adoption, and then there's like, okay, I understand it a bit more, and then it builds on itself. And we've watched the brands we've been with over the years take that and start to adopt and advance themselves in ways that they couldn't if they didn't get started.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's really interesting, this training of training designers to design for circularity. Could you talk about that a little bit more? I think that's really fascinating and a part that we don't always talk about very much. So what sorts of things does the Renewal Workshop train designers on?
Yeah, so we have this great workshop, and we actually augmented it this last year and a half for to be virtual because of COVID, which has allowed us to offer the workshop to a lot more brands who are not necessarily in Oregon or in Amsterdam. So what it is it's designers come in, and it's a very hands-on working workshop where they get exposed to the 101 of what is circularity. So like the stuff you referenced with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the design principles, and like why materials, like if we can recycle an aluminum can, but why can't I recycle a ski jacket? And really getting the thing of understanding like, oh, all of these little components on our product are made of different materials, or oh, this is where the recycling systems of textiles are today. And yeah, we all wish it would look different than it does, but here's where we are. Or we talk about what if you design a product that's like now you have to sell it in 5 years from now. We do some really great stuff around disassembly and repairability. And the thing of it is that most designers go to school and learn how to design product to build the product. And then they come and work in a business, and the business puts these pressure on them. They're like, yes, build that rain jacket, but I need it to be at this price point. So designers really learn over time, like, oh, okay, yeah, I gotta save 15 cents. So I'm gonna use this zipper instead of this zipper. But then all of a sudden, if you go, oh, hey, by the way, here's the data back on all your product and where it fails over time, and say it was like your product pills extensively, then they might say, okay, I am going to invest more into the material the first time, because then I'm going to yield more product into the second time. Mm-hmm. So it's about just sort of giving designers the tools of like how to think through the new future that their products are going to have to live in.
Yeah, right. And if companies are having take back and resell programs, they're going to be more incentivized to design with longevity in mind. So yeah, it's all sort of connected. Yeah, lots to think about there. A lot of exciting things that Renewal Workshop is doing. And I loved hearing about that and hearing about some of the solutions, because yeah, it gets pretty overwhelming. So thank you for this conversation and for taking time out of your day to chat with me. We are nearing the end of the interview, but I have one last question that I ask all the guests that come on to the podcast. And that is, what does a better future for fashion look like to you?
That's a good question. So, fashion is so unique for me because it has so many coexisting realities within it. So, fashion is an element of functionality, right? So, I have to wear clothes because it gets cold outside, or there are laws that say I can't be naked running around. So, you have this functionality piece to it. But then, fashion is also this deep expression of identity and this importance of reflecting me inside of the culture and society that I am. So it's becomes complicated quickly because there's a lot of stop fast fashion, but then there's also like, well, fashion's changing over time. Like, can you truly have completely timeless products? So
Mhm.
what I'd like to see is a fashion industry that can hold this duality inside of it. So having flexibility for creativity, but then to be constrained inside circular principles so that fashion brands are like committed to the principles of circularity, design without waste, design for repairability, recyclability, resale, but then also to have space for creativity and self-expression. So I think of it as a system that mirrors nature where there is no waste.
Beautiful. What a great note to end on. Thank you, Nicole. This was a great conversation. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And we'll see you again in the next episode of the podcast.
Thank you.